Good morning. It is Tuesday, the 12th of May. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your daily check-in with European news and analysis, live here on Euronews. Coming up, the European Union has signed off on sanctions against Israeli settlers over ongoing violence in the West Bank. EU foreign ministers took the decision at talks in Brussels. The long-awaited move was possible due to Hungary's brand new government. And EU countries remain divided over whether to engage directly with Vladimir Putin. Last weekend, the Russian president suggested he was open to talks to end the war and hinted that the former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder could play a role. Brussels, though, has rejected the proposal. Meanwhile, in the UK, Prime Minister Keir Starmer is under mounting pressure, with more Labour MPs calling for his resignation. We'll speak exclusively to the UK's Europe Minister, a member of the very Labour Party. And it's that time of the year again when millions of Europeans tune in to the pan-European song contest, the Eurovision. It starts tonight. But this year is different. Spain and Slovenia are snubbing the festival, and Ireland over Israel's war in Gaza. We can start first with those meetings between EU foreign affairs ministers that saw countries split over that idea of engaging directly with Russia to end the ongoing war in Ukraine. Euronews' Jorge Librero followed the talks for us and joins me now for the latest. So Jorge, I really feel like we've been here before. Remind us why this topic is on the agenda again.
Indeed, we've been talking about talking with Russia for at least 1 year now. But something has changed now. It's not Vladimir Putin, it's more Volodymyr Zelensky, who is increasingly exasperated and frustrated with the White House diplomacy, which is now fully focused on the Middle East. Last week, Zelensky publicly called on the Europeans to have one common voice with talks with Russia. And he said we need to find a workable diplomatic format to make this happen. So now we have Zelensky's encouragement on the record. But despite this, member states remain very divided on whether we should talk with Russia or not to break this diplomatic isolation. We know that some member states, like France and Italy, want to have a seat at the table as soon as possible, while other member states like Germany, the Baltics, the Nordics, prefer to wait and approve new sanctions to weaken the Russian economy, and this could weaken Russia's negotiating hand. But the divisions, as I said, are intractable for the time being, and this became very clear yesterday at the meeting of foreign affairs ministers, and this is what Kaja Kallas, the High Representative, had to say at the end.
EU has always supported attempts to achieve a just and lasting peace. For Europe to take more active role, we must agree amongst ourselves what we want to talk to Russia about and what are our red lines.
Kaja Kallas there. So what's next? Can Kaja Kallas there bridge the differences?
Can she do it? That's a good question. Look, for the past weeks, Kaja Kallas has been circulated a confidential document that includes concessions and demands that Russia should fulfill at the negotiating table. Of course, this document is going to be ignored by Russia, but it could help bring all the 27 member states together towards a common position to avoid this sort of cacophony that we have seen in the past, when member states go their own way. And this document will be discussed again later this month in Cyprus. So let's see if they find a final version of this document. However, there are two factors that are influencing the discussions very much. The first one is that Russia's position remains maximalist. It remains unchanged. So what is the point of speaking with Russia if Russia is going to tell you the same thing that's been saying for the past year? And the second one is that Russia continues to bombard Ukraine. Last week, it bombarded a kindergarten. So it shows the ruthlessness of this war of aggression. So nobody wants to send a special envoy to Moscow and then the next day see Moscow strike a hospital in Kyiv. This is something that would be humiliating for the Europeans. So the bottom line is here. Do the benefits of speaking with Russia outweigh the risks, or do the risks outweigh the benefits? And when the Europeans manage to answer this question, they will be able to take a step forward.
Well, they probably might need a little bit more time.
More time indeed, for sure.
Okay, Liberator, thank you so much for that very comprehensive update there. And for another view, coming up, we'll be joined by Thomas Byrne, the Irish Minister for Defence and European Affairs. As Ireland prepares to take over the presidency of the Council of the European Union, the Fianna Fáil politician is in Brussels today to join EU defence ministers for more talks on how to support Ukraine and to boost European security. That's all in a context of an uncertain Middle East, with President Trump stating that the ceasefire with Iran is on, quote, life support. Good morning, Minister. Great to have you with us.
Morning, Maeve. How are you?
Good. So, look, you'll be meeting defence ministers today. You'll be joined by the Ukrainian defence minister. Should we expect anything concrete?
Well, look, I think we will be discussing lots of issues in the defence sphere. We had the discussion yesterday at the Foreign Affairs Council on Ukraine as well. I think Ukraine is very, very strong and forward in people's minds in Europe. So the question is, how do we best help Ukraine? Whether it's provision of military materiel, whether it is through sanctions on Russia, whether it is through peace talks or indeed the enlargement of the European Union. I think there are so many different avenues for us to help Ukraine and to end this war.
And on sanctions against Russia, a 21st package is being written as we speak, something you'll probably have to push through during your presidency. Will it work, though, these sanctions?
Well, look, we've achieved a huge amount. We have unanimity requirements for sanctions and we've got through 20 packages, so we'll do another package, we certainly hope, and work is ongoing in relation to that. Those sanctions have had an impact on the Russian economy, quite a significant impact on the Russian economy. They clearly haven't ended the war, but I think we need to continue putting the pressure on Russia and indeed on its people in order that they can somehow put pressure on Vladimir Putin.
And this is the issue. The war is still ongoing. Some are floating the idea of potentially speaking to Russia, a conversation that's been going on for many, many months now. What is Ireland's view here?
Well, look, we support continued sanctions. We support the enlargement of the EU to include Ukraine. And we've also supported when individual leaders have contacted Vladimir Putin in the past. We think it is important to allow that dialogue to take place if it's going to end the war.
Is it time for a special envoy, an appointee?
Well, look, I mean, that's for a consideration for another day, and that's a Vladimir Putin suggestion this week. So I don't think I'm going to lean into that. I think the focus has to be to support Ukraine. We have peace talks which the Americans have been facilitating, and we've been very supportive of those peace talks. And if there were to be a place for the European Union, I think we'd be supportive of that as well. But of course, coming into presidency mode, Ireland, of course, has to take into account the views of the member states. And of course, Kai Kallas and Antonio Costa get the consensus of the member states on foreign policy issues. And
on consensus, there was one move last night here in Brussels regarding sanctions against settlers in the West Bank. This was allowed, of course, because of the new change of government in Hungary. Will these have much of an impact, though, on the ground?
Well, look, I think it's very, very welcome that Hungary has changed its position on this and that you have all the member states of the European Union agreeing on this. I think this is a step forward. I think there is more that we can do to help people in Palestine. But I think this is very, very welcome. Nobody disagrees with this now around the European table. I think it does send a message to people that the European Union is responding to genuinely serious concerns that people have.
And what else could change now that there's a new government in Hungary?
Well, look, we await discussions with them, but I mean, obviously the Hungarian government up to now has blocked the opening of accession talks formally with Ukraine. That's something that we'd like to see change. They obviously have to negotiate a significant amount of money to be paid into Hungary that they would have been entitled to, but for the actions of their previous government. So I think there's a lot of work going to happen in relation to that in the next few weeks and months.
And just a final question. The Eurovision is starting, of course, tonight. You won't be watching. Ireland is boycotting the music festival. Are you disappointed other countries didn't join in your boycott?
It's not a matter for the government. RTE is taking that decision themselves. People in Ireland can watch BBC and other channels as well if they wish to watch it. This is a decision that RTE has taken.
And do you support it?
We don't get involved. We're not Hungary. We don't get involved in telling the media what to do in Ireland. So I think it's important that they have their independence. They've decided this independently, and that's a decision for them to take in relation to their audience. The independence of RTE, I think, is something that has been critical and central to our democracy over the decades.
OK, Minister Thomas Byrne, thank you so much for coming in to us, and best of luck with your long day of talks. Here, and now to the UK, where Keir Starmer's hold on power appears to be slipping away. Cabinet ministers have asked him to set out a timetable for his departure. Despite this, the UK is still trying to reset relations with Brussels and set the agenda abroad. Our EU correspondent, Angela Scudens, spoke to the UK Europe Minister and started by asking him about Downing Street's role in supporting abducted Ukrainian children.
Russia, as I said, has taken tens of thousands of these children, identifying where they are, making sure that we understand where they've gone. They've gone all over Russia, in many cases forcibly adopted, and in some cases taken to camps, indoctrinated, in some cases taught to try and hate where they came from. It's one of the most shocking things I think that I've ever heard of, and that's why today also we are announcing new sanctions on individuals and organisations who are behind this practice, building on the sanctions that we've already introduced.
Tell me a little bit more about the sanctions, as well as that €1.3 million equivalent injection that has been pumped into this fight.
Well, that money comes on top of money that we've already put into some of the pilot tracing programmes and initiatives which are doing this crucially important work on identifying these children and where they've gone. But on top of that, it is about exposing and holding to account those who are responsible. And as I said, that's not just individuals, that's also organisations and locations which have been used for these indoctrination camps and attempts to turn Ukrainian children against their culture and their heritage and their history. And that's what's the most heinous part of this, really, is this not only what's being done to these children directly, but it's that attempt to destroy Ukrainian culture, history, language, and that very much sits at the horrific way in which Putin has prosecuted this war.
Absolutely. Let's look at the recent election over the weekend in Britain. How is the government of Keir Starmer digesting this news, which saw Labor lose quite disastrously in the local election, the council elections, and saw the Reform UK doing quite well?
Well, the Prime Minister set out his response very clearly in her speech this morning. He has accepted responsibility for where there have been significant challenges, particularly in the way that we're communicating with the country, and that people are anxious for change and change to happen faster. But I'm very proud of our record as a government in what we're doing on health, on education, on transport, on bringing children out of poverty, on increasing the minimum wage, on the greatest transformation of workers' rights in a generation, our investments in renewable energy, our new police on the streets. And we all have a job to do to communicate that more clearly and to provide hope and optimism about the future in what is a very, very difficult time. And what he was acknowledging absolutely this morning is that people are still feeling the pinch in their pocket. They're seeing conflict around the world. They're seeing pressure on energy prices. And we as a government have to be seen to be responding to that. And we are, and we will continue to do so.
But he's also made it quite a big, strong point of his policy platform to reset relations between the UK and the EU. Does the results at the ballot box suggest that perhaps Britons don't actually want this? Well,
he set out very clearly this morning that, a lot of the things that were told us about Brexit by Nigel Farage and Reform were simply not true. He said it would make us richer. It hasn't. He said it would bring down migration. In fact, migration had gone up, although we're taking significant steps to reduce irregular migration. And of course, he made a load of other false promises about the so-called sunny uplands that would come, and that hasn't been the case. So the Prime Minister has set out very clearly we need to be working closely with our European partners on the economy, on security, on defence, and internationally in what is a very turbulent world. And that's exactly what we will be doing in the run-up to the next UK-EU summit, and what we're trying to achieve through our agreements on agriculture and food, on energy, on a youth experience scheme. That's what he set out this morning. It's what we're all working towards.
Do you have a date for that summit?
We don't have a fixed date yet, but it will be this summer, and we're working on an ambitious agenda.
And of course, we will keep a very close eye on that summit and report on it. But now, farmer groups are furious about rising energy and fertiliser costs. Since the war in Iran and high gas prices, fertilisers are becoming very expensive to produce, and farmers were hoping for serious support from Brussels. Now, the European Commission will come out with a fertiliser action plan next Tuesday, but the leaked version so far has not impressed farmer groups. For more, we can bring in now Maximiliano Giansanti. That's the president of COPA, a group that represents no less than 22 million farmers all across Europe. So thank you so much for joining us. Good morning to you. And tell us first your thoughts on the leaked version of this draft fertiliser action plan that will come out next Tuesday here in Brussels.
Hello, good morning. The situation in the country is serious and critical. We have seen a significant increase in fertilizers and energy costs, in particular on the fertilizer side, the price of urea has passed from 300 euros per ton to 1,000 euros per ton. So the farmers are really, really tough. The situation is not so good. The first leaks on the action plan on next week is not what we expect, but it's leaks, so we have to see. We have 3 clear requests to the Commission. First of all, to suspend the CBAM tax. The CBAM tax is another cost for the consumers, because the farmers must to pay for this year more or less 1 billion euros more just in taxes, and we will arrive at 3.4 billions of euros in the next year, so much money for farmers. Second one, more flexibility in the use of the nitrate directive. In this moment, we have to use all what we have inside of our farms. Why we have to go on the market to buy and spend so much money? Third, to have a temporary removal of MFN tariffs on duties on the fertilizers imports. It's very important. Why? Because the risk is to have increasingly prices in the cost for farmers, and that means the farmers are going to switch to change their program. The FAO says we are on phase on an agri-shock and agri-food inflation. And that is what we don't want to have.
Well, indeed, that was my next question for consumers. What's at stake here for them? Could we be facing food shortages in your view?
The risk is to have increasing price on the food, yes. And what we saw in the past that on the example on the Ukrainian war in 2022, later 6 to 9 months, we had a seriously increasing in the price of the food. And the risk is to have the same thing also this time. So the time to act is now. And this is why we make pressure on the commissioner. The farmers is not just an expended money for commission. It's food security, and the food security is what the European citizens want by the farmers.
So you've got 3 very clear demands there for the European Commission, but of course you won't get exactly what you want. Do you think the Commission might meet you here in the middle? Have you high expectations ahead of Tuesday's proposal?
I don't know. Let's see. The expectations are very, very high because the situation is really critical. There is a lot of farmers that are using less fertilizers. That means we have less production on the next summer on the wheat, as example. The wheat is at the basis for bread or pasta. So, and the risk is that the farmers on the next September are going to have different choices on the next sowing time.
OK, thank you so much for that. We'll check in again with you, of course, next Tuesday. But now we move on to a heartbreaking story that has brought a number of families together in France. At stake here, the tech giant TikTok, they say, is responsible for the death of their teenagers. Jakob Janis tells us more.
16 French families have launched an unusual collective complaint against TikTok, accusing the social media platform of a systematic abuse of weakness. And while US-style class actions are rare in the French legal system, this group is united by a tragic common thread. 5 of their children have died by suicide. And according to France Info, their lawyer describes the algorithm as a digital crack designed to trap teenagers in mental prisons that could lead to self-harm and depression. Let's investigate. This legal battle is fueling President Macron's push for a total social media ban for those under 15, planned for this September. This digital shield would also ban mobile phones in high schools across the country. And Brussels follows. A new EU age verification app is now ready for rollout and is expected to be available for public download by this summer. It allows teenagers to prove their age using zero-knowledge technology, meaning they can verify their identity without handing over private data to tech giants. For years, platforms argued that checking ages created too many risks to data protection. But with this new technology, the European Commission says there are now no more excuses.
It is for parents to raise their children and not for platforms.
However, some experts remain unconvinced. Critics argue that the EU app is a quick technical fix for a structural problem, and they insist the danger isn't the user's age, but the addictive recommender systems that platforms refuse to change. One thing is certain though, France is effectively declaring a public health emergency against big tech. And for these families, the status quo is no longer an option.
Jacob Janus there on a story being watched carefully here in Brussels. And speaking of the Belgian capital, if you are trying to get in or out of it today, you won't, as Belgium's 3 largest trade unions are striking over retirement age laws. So there's major disruptions at Brussels airport. For more on that story or anything else we're covering, do visit euronews.com. But that brings this edition to an end. Reach out to us here at Europe Today at euronews.com if you have any comments or pointers. Take care, thanks for watching, and see you very soon.